So hello, this is the third roundtable meeting of 13th Vardia, and today we are with Vasıf Kortun. We are with you, Vasıf.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and having me there, even if virtually. Thank you, Kerem, and thank you, the Pavilion of Turkey. So basically, there were a few cardinal questions about the place, role, and the meaning, so to speak, of the biennial. You know, I'm outside the world of architecture, obviously, so that's not my forte. But I've been involved with biennials quite a bit over the years, over many years, and I've been involved with art biennials, so to speak, and and perhaps the art biennials kind of paved the way for other forms of professions to come through in the biennial experience, such as architecture and design. As we see in Turkey and other places, the traditional biennials keep on adding design and architecture to their, let's say, to their portfolio to maximize the situation over the last few years, to be specific. I mean, the biennial is not a transhistorical fact or a transhistorical event. It's quite embedded in its time and also embedded in its very particular context. I mean, as you probably know, and you're right there, you know, from Venice of late 19th century to today, it's quite difficult to even define what a biennial is, because they have completely different impacts over the years. And one thing is for sure, you know, Venice as a port city and as a production import-export city was losing its power against the stronger city-states in the late 19th century, and they actually came up with something quite brilliant, being a port town, being a networked city, is when they invent actually this idea of a particular kind of world fair and a trade fair, and the biennial that followed it. And that puts Venice over the years in a very particular place, which the other biennials are not in that place. You know, it's unique in that form, in the sense that Venice is not a place. I don't mean a non-linear kind of thing, but it's not a specific place. It's the place where it's a generic space. It's the ultimate space of the biennial, which doesn't have any particular kind of rootedness the way other biennials can have a root or an anchor to a particular geography, to a particular political or even emotional context. You know, Venice is a shrinking town. It used to be maybe a decade ago, there were maybe 75,000 Venetians. Now there are not even 40,000 of them. So we are in a mass city, a tourist city, but it's a shrinking city. So put that aside. I mean, keep that as part of the idea. The second biennial wave really starts after the Second War. It's a post-war experience with Sao Paulo being one of the most powerful ones. Sao Paulo is also a biennial of nation building, and it also encourages its place in Latin America as the most powerful country. And and then Sydney comes later. Sydney is also in the same. Australia is in the same predicament in the way that it empowers Australia as the most significant place of Southeast Asia. And the whole region. So these projects were of a particular kind, and we can count many others, like the Alexandria Biennial, you know, which for Egypt it was quite critical because it was a Nasserite biennial. I mean, it underscored the power of the new Arab Republic. So this one, and. So that's and you can count Tehran and Tehran biennial and other biennials in that context. What happens after the 80s? You know, after the late after the late 80s. Sorry, my cat is getting in the way. And after the late 80s, after the wall, the Berlin Wall falls down, is the last stage of the, not the last, like the third phase of biennial expansion. You can think of this not only in terms of the wall, but also in terms of neoliberal economic policies and the empowerment of cities, the new place of cities in our current global current international context. And all of the biennials that arrive after 89 are actually post-dictatorship biennials. You can even put Istanbul, sorry. Apologies, Istanbul Biennial in that context. It comes after the coup d'etat of 1980, loosens. There's a new economic context, and the Istanbul Biennial as a secular project, not as a state project, but as a private foundation project, could be put in that range. Also Gwangju in South Korea, you can imagine as one of the most important biennials of the last century. Comes after the democratic revolution of South Korea, and Gwangju is the heart of the democratic revolution of and Manifesta, which is an itinerant biennial that moves from city to city within the European space. Now last one was in Palermo, I believe, is also underscores again a biennial which is a pan-European biennial, which travels the European space from place to place, each edition, and it has to do with the EU process and the post East Europe situation. So I mean that was, and then all the others started coming in, all the other 100 or 120 biennials or 150. I don't know how many of them there are right now, but each city used to have one from early 2000s onwards. Then there has been what I think is that there has been a kind of an more anemic stage in terms of biennials, because things that are much more powerful economically and things that to which you can apply event condition has overtaken the energy of biennials, and these would be things like art fairs and programs that stress the event condition. So I mean, it's more or less the same thing in Venice. I mean, I don't know how long you have been there, but after the preview days and after when the real professional comes, I mean, not before and then the first 3-4 days, there's a real drop in the interest, and then things pick up again towards the end of the biennial. I mean, there's always this kind of curve, which means that the biennial is, for most of us, the biennial happens in the first 3 days or 4 days. So it's very counterintuitive, this project that you're doing in Venice, in a very good way, because it actually stretches the notion, stretches the idea of the biennial and undoes what we expect it to become, which is the event condition. I mean, there are a lot of people grappling with this at this moment, but maybe that would be a start of a discussion, and then we can go on from here. The floor is yours, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Vasıf, for your insights about the conceptualization of the idea of Biennale. I believe there will be questions in the house after your speech. Are there any? Elif.
Hi. I will start with the question that we have been discussing over the past week. For whom does the Biennale exist, and how do you think the permeability of the free space affects the exhibitors?
Can you repeat the second question? How's the permeability of?
free space affects the exhibitors?
Okay. For whom does the biennial exist? I mean, it's, which one? Which biennial? Yeah. I mean, that's a critical question here, because Venice exists for the professionals. Nobody really cares about the public per se. The public is also, is not something we take into effect at many places, nor should we, because the public is silent. The public is a category which I think is we are overestimating, because the public doesn't have its own agencies, and the public can only assume an agency if it has a voice. For the public to have a voice, it needs it must become not public in a way. It must become an interest group, it must become a community, it must become something else other than the public, because the public is silent. Yeah. So in a way, for whom, when we say like for whom does the biennial exist, that's, in Venice, I think it's for professionals. I do really think very much so. All the rest are potential professionals. All the rest are customers, because they come for tourism, and part of their healthy tourism or cultural tourism is a biennial. That's the surplus. That's the extra. If the project was happening in a very embedded city, for which a biennial is absolutely critical for its health, for its sustenance, let's say Istanbul could be one of those, we can count a few other cities, or a few biennials. I think that a notion of community or diverse communities becomes really, really, really critical. It's not about that something exists for you, but it's about how you can invent something, because it's the act of the exhibition, or it's the act of how you do this, how you employ this agency as an exhibitionary model or a non-exhibitionary model within an exhibition or within a biennial is the critical aspect. That's when you invent something that's when ideally you can invent something that is not there. So in a way, something does not exist for you. You have to make it exist. You have to invent a public. You have to invent a community. You have to invent a situation for which there's a before and after in the ideal sense of terms. But other than that, there are people will come in and will go, which is just fine and wonderful, etc., etc. But that's not what you do things for, And the notion of audience has never been of any interest to me personally. It's only in a moment of interaction that things start to make sense. Although you cannot get in people's heads. This is also not possible, because you don't know where they take where they take the project to. A biennial has always been for me a place where you can do things that cannot be done otherwise. Because it's not a museum exhibition. It doesn't have a collection. It doesn't come with an artillery behind it. You just have to invent the world as you're producing it, as you are making it. It has the capacity of experimentation and experimentality, and the capacity to do something wrong, much more so than a settled institution. So that's it's all a contextual question at the end of the day. You know, it's what you make of it. I don't believe in particular kinds of rules on that front. But let me underline it again. I'm not so interested in the category of who something should exist for. You have to give yourself. I mean, I give myself this kind of the license to do something within a very limited range, because these are fragile projects at the end of the day. They only live with their actual memory, which is a very fragile memory. Yeah, I mean, I guess the second part is of the one. I mean, the second part of your question is embedded already in my answer. Yeah, my response.
Hello and welcome. My question is that you manage privately supported institutions for a long time, and can you talk about what role do you think art institutions should play in a wider concept in terms of the publicness?
That's a good question. Thank you. I mean, this is a long discussion, but to make it very short, as I was, I mean, I moved from one institution to another. I founded many institutions. It took with each institution there was a different idea of what you would say a public. Yeah. With the last one, it started with idea like, forget the public, forget the audience, the notion of audience. Maybe we can use the notion of user. That was one of the terms that we were thinking. A user is as somebody who actually uses the institution as a tool, and institutions are tools, or projects are tools to do other things with. They are in and of themselves not so valuable. It's what you do with them is what's the critical aspect, what's most valuable. And then the notional user was not sufficient because it doesn't include a particular kind of interactivity or a discussion with what the producers do. A user can come in and take something home, do something else with it, but the institution doesn't learn from users. They understand the use, but they don't learn from the users. And then we switched to the idea of constituents or constituencies. And a constituent is somebody who institutes with you, it's in an ideal sense. So then you can take this in two parts. One is constituency as a group. It could be an interest group. It could be, I don't know, an immigrant association, or it could be a political group. It could be a non-political group. It could be all kinds of things. When constituents as individuals and constituencies as groups enter a discussion with an institution, with a museum or whatever it may be, there is in the long term an idea about co-ownership. If the narrative is strong and it's sustained for a very long time, and actually you can claim public co-ownership of the institution. You don't let the public own the institution. That would be insane. It's like asking you to design a car engine for me. This is not what you know about. It's not what I know about. But what I know about, this knowledge that I try to kind of not bring to the world, but kind of air and push to the world, has to be tested, looked at, ripped apart, reconstructed, and fed back to the institution. So this kind of co-ownership is absolutely, I think, in the long term is going to be the most necessary thing, because we as curators or programmers or institution builders or directors, we don't own the institution. It does not belong to us. We are temporary holders of a place in a context for a particular period of time. The ownership is symbolically is always up for grabs. You know, it's what you may say what you do with constituents and how they take things and run with it. But that's also not without complications. You know, if you are in a very nice, I don't know, happy West European city where there is some sort of still some kind of welfare system and understanding of blah blah blah, co-ownership could be very boring, actually. When you're in a situation which is fraught with political situations, unrest, and all of that, then co-ownership becomes really radicalized. You know, your constituents also become quite radicalized. It's an interesting moment, but there's no good way out of this. You know, I mean, none of this guarantees success. It only feeds more questions and more inquiries, I think. So, I mean, it's not, you know, I don't look at private or public in the classical way of a private, you know, private has disinterest and public does has interest, because public has already privatized completely over the years. So we're looking at different forms of private interest, and the public is even more problematic because they represent things that they claim, but they do not any longer represent, which is public interest. Public also supports privatized or tribalized interests nowadays.
Thank you. My question will be departing from your mentioning that the notion of Biennale being a post-dictatorship thing, and also you have mentioned the things not being existing for us on themselves, but rather we have to invent the community to make it. Speaking of these, what comes to mind is the political role of the curatorship. In this sense, could you articulate about the matter a bit more, especially the role of curatorship about decolonization and the emancipatory theories?
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, great question. I mean, I don't want to get into the political aspects so much, because we've got enough of this over the last years. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just like a it's like a serpent that eats its own tail. Let's not make ourselves happy or unhappy. But the important thing you really mentioned is what I also missed to say at the beginning, is the post-89 situation is not only the end of dictatorships, but also of the new world. I mean, the 20th century, everybody has an end for the 20th century, but 89 seems to be the most appropriate ending of it all, because it's also the World Wide Web, you know, when it goes public. You know, it's also the second bicentennial, let's say, of the French Revolution of 1789 to 1989, which also means that it's also the end of the Enlightenment. It's the end of the modern world as we know it, and it's also the end of a bipolar world. I mean, these are all critical. But at the very same time, after 89, a whole generation of younger curators and practitioners who were coming from other parts of the world
from Nigeria, from China, I don't know, from Taipei, from Romania, from Sofia, Moscow, etc., etc., all around the world, come into this art and architecture world in a very powerful, in a very powerful manner. I don't. In retrospect, it was not so much about emancipation, but representation took a completely new hold after '89. Before that, there was Venice is Venice. You always had the pavilions. The national pavilions, for example, but you did not have. You had 20 national pavilions, and that was the end of the world until 1990. Now, even Turkey is there. Maybe downstairs is it Saudi Arabia now still? Or was it? Who was it? Yeah, strange bedfellows. Okay, downstairs, and also the foundation is selling to countries as much as it can. Soon enough there should be probably a Kosovo pavilion or whatever pavilion. Physically, as a real place. It is the expansion of representation. Total expansion of representation, as if we all have a place in the world, in this kind of UN style new biennial model. But it's not, but at the same time, it wasn't true. The early generation, as they were coming, even if they were not in a particular kind of emancipatory politics, they were political. The post-coloniality took a very particular hold through biennials but we're talking about a handful of people, actually. We're not talking the whole world. That who really changed the early generation, the early curatorial generation. I believe we're quite critical in that. In that respect, from people from Maria Lin to Hu Hanru, from Okvi Envezor to Charles Zeshe and to others. We kind of shifted the train, could say, collectively. And I remember in 1990. This is kind of maybe a side story, but this is a nice story. In 1990, that was my first biennial in Venice, the first time. Of course, there were no Turks around. There's unimaginable of Turkish collectors or architects or artists or historians or whatnot. There was no such thing. It was we were inside the Italian pavilion all the way to the back. The ceilings were maybe 2 meters high or maybe low, and Turkey had a small room next to Costa Rica and other Middle American countries. It was very nice, actually. We were just happy to be there, although we were a bit ezik in Turkish. And then there was an important conference at Fondazione Cini, and Homi Bhabha gave the keynote speech, and he had just written, I believe, his most important book, what did it call it? On hybridity, basically, and cultural hybridity. And a lot of people from different countries were together, from the a few people from former Soviet Union, and a few people from Australia. At that time, coming from Australia was a big deal. Or there was certainly no one from Africa, but there was somebody from Poland, and etc. And everybody was talking about their isolation, how Venice was impossible to go. North Americans were also complaining because they had no idea about what was going on in the world. They also felt completely left behind. And then after '89, it's things progress as we look at the 1990s, which is probably why we are all in this hellhole today, because we overlooked everything that was so dangerous in the 1990s. you know, I mean, in that way, I mean, Clinton perhaps was much more dangerous, and Blair were much more dangerous than Thatcher and Reagan, you know. And it was a big, happy family where everyone seemed to have a place at the table, potentially a place at the table. Well, we all have a place at the table now, and look where we are. Which is altogether better than what was happening before 89. It's good to have a place at the table, but the table has become meaningless.
Thank you, Vasıf. We still have time for some questions. I think there would be some amongst you. Is there? Cemre.
Hello. Within your writings on Istanbul and arts, you claim that Istanbul has become the one and only center of arts. And the cities like Ankara has been losing its status in the cultural milieu because of the lack of existence of the financial interest and financial forces. On the other hand, for the past several years, the art field has been experiencing a regional shift by the events like Mardin Biennial. So what is your opinion about that shift? And how can you relate that shift to your thoughts on the relationship between the financial forces and art? And are you expecting any more regional shifts in the art field?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a wizard. I was merely making a comment on something that was provisional, which is the situation about the Istanbul art world during that time. I wouldn't make the same. I couldn't quite make the same claim now, although it's certainly the most powerful place in Turkey. I mean, that's normal. Given Ankara, yes, I was thinking about the big business. I mean, the classical traditional business of business leaving Ankara, but Ankara has been in decline since the 50s anyhow, in terms of not in terms of its intellectual density, in terms of universities and etc., but in terms of how that density pours into the city. You know, the last great Ankara association was probably Helicon, and that was in the 50s. You know, I mean, that's 60 years of pretty dire and complicated situation, and also being close to the capital never makes things better in Turkey. It probably makes things worse. In terms of Mardin and Çanakkale and Sinop and other biennials coming to the picture, it's only great. But I am more interested in a biennial that is more like a perennial, which was our kind of policy in 2005 biennial. That is to say, the biennial could be the crescendo, but life goes on between those 2 years, between those 24 months, if we look at it. And for smaller, you know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the event condition. You know, there's nothing wrong with the big bombastic moment in which things come close. You know, I mean, that's wonderful and all of that. But life has to go on between those 24 months, you know, rhythmically, systematically, with programs going on, projects, etc., etc. I mean, if you're thinking of making a city better, you know, better for your citizens, you must not lose your. You can lose your creative industry people, but you must not lose your creative people. Or producing people, you know, but c'est la vie, you know, I mean, things go on, and if you can't make your city better for your citizens, they'll go somewhere else, rightly so. I'm not being judgmental on this, but I mean, you know, Mardin is Mardin Biennial is a great project, but it's not for Mardin people. We love Mardin Biennial from a distance. You know, it really excites us because the fact that they can, I mean, you know, they can survive and they can do such a thing under those conditions. But Mardin is also, let's not forget that it's a major tourist city. It's being poised for a position like that. Mardin wants to be the stage set for the Arab world and for the film industry internationally. Let's not forget that. And it's completely monocultural, but it claims to be incredibly mixed. Let's not forget that. I mean, I think I mean I like the Mardin Biennial from a distance. If you go to Mardin Biennial, as I have been in the middle of the exhibition, you know, almost nothing was working. But that was 3 editions ago. Maybe it's completely different now. Is that it's, you know Venice. I mean, you must have walked around quite a bit in the throughout the exhibition. In the dead of the season, you will see that not everything is working very well, or things are done at the opening moment. You can only have the leftovers. I don't know. I don't know. It's complicated. I mean, everything is complicated. I would be more nuanced than what I'm saying right now. Actually, you know, it's great. There should be more exhibitions. You know, they're completely harmless things. Sometimes they can even be incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful. I mean, particularly for the younger generations. If it's great, people won't leave their city. What's better than that? You know.
Thank you, Vasıf. Your insights has been very valuable, and like your descriptions have been quite beneficial for the debates we had in the previous few days. So thank you very much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Enjoy it. Bye bye. Take care.